Okay.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
Tonight, why Kamala Harris chose Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. Then Eye on America, the growing and expensive role social media influencers now have in politics. And Tropical Storm Debbie drenches the South. When will it hit the Northeast? On the CBS.
Tim Walz to me. He is someone that has always believed in putting his country first.
Tim Walz's record is a joke. He's been one of the most far-left radicals in the entire United States government at any level.
We have a terrific Midwestern governor in Tim Walz that's been chosen, and I'm going to go out and support him and the ticket.
Hello, I'm Nicole Killian in Washington, and welcome to America Decides. With the Democratic ticket now complete, Vice President Kamala Harris and her new running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, are about to make their first joint appearance in Philadelphia. But first, here's a look at the moment when the vice president asked Walz to join the ticket.
Listen, I want you to do this with me. Let's do this together. Would you be my running mate and let's get this thing on the road?
I would be honored, Madam Vice President.
The joy that you're bringing back to the country, the enthusiasm that's out there, it'll be a privilege to take this with you across the country.
Our Nancy Cordes is in Philadelphia for tonight's rally, which is part of a multi-state battleground tour, and our Ed O'Keefe is in Minneapolis. Nancy, I want to start with you. First and foremost, what can we expect to hear from Governor Walz today, and how are supporters there in Philadelphia responding to his selection?
There is jubilation, Nicole, here in Philadelphia at this arena. It seats about 10,000 people. It's almost entirely full. People are still being let in. We were outside. The line stretched more than 6 blocks long. So a lot of anticipation for this first Harris-Walz rally. We're hearing some of the warm-up acts, the U.S. senators from Pennsylvania right now. And according to some of the excerpts we've seen, Walz is going to introduce himself to the country, tell voters a little bit about himself. He's also going to talk about the person at the top of the ticket, Vice President Harris, and he'll have a few jabs at the Republican ticket as well. I have to say, Nicole, arriving here today, seeing how fired up people were, seeing the reaction from Democratic leaders and union leaders, the views appear to be unanimous in Washington and at this rally as well that Walz was the right pick for Kamala Harris.
And Ed, I know you're in St. Paul. Governor Walz did not initially appear to be one of the top names on the VP shortlist, but some are crediting one simple phrase. Let's listen.
We do not like what has happened where we can't even go to Thanksgiving dinner with our uncle because you end up in some weird fight that is unnecessary. and I think bringing back people together, well, it's true. These guys are just weird.
We're not afraid of weird people. No. We're a little bit creeped out, but we're not afraid.
Have you ever seen the guy laugh? That seems very weird to me that an adult can go through 6.5 years of being in the public eye. If he has laughed, it's at someone, not with someone. That is weird behavior.
So besides coining the phrase weird, what were some of the other factors involved in Vice President Harris's decision to choose Tim Walz as her running mate?
In a word, Nicole, chemistry. It came down to the fact that once they got a chance to meet again in person on Sunday at the vice president's residence, that they hit it off. Aides say that, they not only have a lot in common in terms of policy and their focus, whether it's on children, shoring up and protecting abortion rights in this state and trying to federally or nationally, the fact that they, just see eye to eye on a host of other issues, it just clicked. And that was the real reason. And they said, look, if you go back to 4 years ago when Joe Biden picked Kamala Harris, it was a similar thing. It just at the time made sense. And it was a partnership that Biden believed would work. In this case, it's a partnership that Harris believes will work with the governor. Also his executive experience, the fact that he is a governor, that it is someone who comes to the job having made decisions on a statewide level. If you look now at the big four candidates on both sides, none of them have that sort of practical, current executive experience in the public space, at least. And so there was a real push for that as well. If elected, Walz would be the first Democratic governor to be elected in about 100 years to the vice presidency, which just shows you how infrequent it is for Democrats, at least, to put a sitting governor into one of these two spots. So all of that a big factor. But ultimately, yes, what brought more attention back to him was the fact that through a series of appearances, he very quickly sort of nailed in the eyes of Democrats what it is that they've got against Trump and Vance. The idea that they're weird, that they're not representative of where they think America is or should be headed. And it wasn't he's a fascist or he's a dictator or he's a womanizer. It was just another word and another way to describe him that they felt had universal appeal. And you knew it was catching on when Harris and when a lot of the others that wanted to be vice president or her running mate also started using it. It was a sign that it was effective and it was catching on.
Nancy, in addition to the vice president and Governor Walz, will also hear from Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro at the rally. In the end, why didn't he make the cut?
I think there were a few reasons, Nicole. First of all, a person close to the selection process has confirmed that Shapiro himself was struggling a little bit with the notion of leaving his role here in Pennsylvania. He has served as the governor for less than 2 years. He is popular here in the state, and he conveyed some of that to Vice President Harris. But beyond that, I do think it was some of the things that Ed has mentioned, the rapport between Harris and Walz, the fact that Walz had this unique mix of executive experience, serving as governor for 6 years, but also legislative experience, serving in Congress for 12 years, having been on the Armed Services Committee, having been on the Veteran Affairs Committee, having allies in Congress, having spent a lot more time, frankly, in the halls of Congress than Kamala Harris did before she was selected as vice president, and having the ability to be sent down to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue if they are elected and do those negotiations, make those calls on behalf of the White House and their priorities.
And the Harris campaign rolled out a new ad today featuring Walz shortly after the announcement. Here's a clip.
When I grew up, community was a way of life. My high school class was 24 people. I was related to half of them. I learned to be generous towards my neighbors, compromise without compromising my values, and work for the common good.
Obviously, quite a catchy ad there. But look, a lot of voters are still getting to know not just the vice president. Now they're also going to have to get to know Tim Walz. Is that possible that they can get people comfortable with this ticket in the next 90 days or so?
It's a good question, Nicole. We'll have to wait and see. But certainly the initial public response to the vice president becoming the nominee led to about a $200 million haul in the first 6 days. In the first few hours since the Walz announcement, the campaign says it raised about $10 million in smaller donations of $200 or less. So that's one indication potentially of the response or the interest in them. The race will be on to define both of them now, though. You're right. You saw this afternoon Republicans very quickly seize on what many believe to be the biggest vulnerability for Governor Walz, and that is how he oversaw the response to the riots that broke out here in St. Paul and across the river in Minneapolis in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. That was an example of perhaps a Democrat slow walking or tiptoeing around a really sensitive issue of race and how to deal with policing at that time. Something that the governor has since acknowledged could have gone differently, but that he also brushed off a lot of the partisan criticism that came in a state-led investigation, for example, by Republicans when they still controlled the legislature. So we'll see if that catches on. And it allows an association or connection to Harris, because at that time, before she was the running mate, she was among those Democrats pushing people to donate to various funds that were set up to help pay for the bail of people who were getting arrested or somehow associated with the violence and the fallout from the George Floyd situation. So Republicans are going to make they're not tough on crime argument. Walz will turn around and point out there were police reforms passed that changed the way police are able to interact with people here, but that also provided more money for training and provided more personnel in the mental health space to deal with some of these situations. It'll be interesting to see if that becomes a part of this conversation. So all sides have to define these two. Democrats will be hard-pressed to do it quickly, not only among their own members and supporters, but to those few thousand or 100,000 or so people in the battleground states who may ultimately still tip this. And remember, ultimately, Nicole, it's always about the top of the ticket, less the bottom of it.
All right, Ed O'Keefe in St. Paul, Minnesota, Nancy Cordes in Philadelphia. Thank you both. And as we just mentioned, the stage is set in Philly for the debut of the new Democratic ticket. We'll hear from Pennsylvania's Lieutenant Governor next, right here on America Decides.
Are you ready to go out and...
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
That decision yesterday didn't do a damn thing to prevent abortions. All it did was make them more dangerous and less accessible, especially to the people who need it.
And that was Governor Tim Walz in 2022 after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Access to reproductive rights is a key issue for Democrats heading into November. Joining us now, Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, Austin Davis, is with us now. Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for being with us. And so I just want to start off by getting your reaction to this pick. And were you surprised at all that Governor Walz was tapped over your fellow Governor Josh Shapiro?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. Look, I am excited about this pick. You know, we have said all along that this decision was a deeply personal decision that Vice President Harris was going to have to make, and she's chosen the person that she believes can help her win this election. and that she believes can help her best govern. I'm also selfishly excited that I get to keep Governor Josh Shapiro here in Pennsylvania as my governing partner, and I know we're going to work our tails off to ensure that we elect this ticket in November and that we flip Pennsylvania blue.
That being said, as we reported at the very beginning of our show, we're just learning from a source familiar with the vice presidential selection process that, Governor Shapiro conveyed to the vice president that he was really struggling with this decision to leave the governorship there in Pennsylvania. Were you aware of that?
It's not surprised. Governor Shapiro loves his job. He loves the people of Pennsylvania. I have seen the care in his eyes as he's crisscrossed this Commonwealth, and as we've worked to deliver real results for the good people here in Pennsylvania. So it's not a surprise to me that he would want to stay and continue this work, and I'm proud that he's going to continue doing that alongside me.
But just to be clear, did you have any conversations with him about that, or did you consult in any way, kind of as this process was playing out?
I've had a number of private conversations throughout this process with the governor. I'm going to keep those conversations private. But what I will say is we are extremely fortunate to have Governor Shapiro leading Pennsylvania. We're fortunate to have Kamala Harris as our nominee and our next president. And we're going to work like hell to make sure we elect Tim Walz and Kamala Harris as the next president and vice president in November.
There have also been some reports that your predecessor, former Lieutenant Governor and now Senator John Fetterman, expressed concerns about Governor Shapiro to the Harris campaign. Did you have any knowledge of that? And do you think that may have hurt his chances in any way?
I think all of that is a lot of petty politics, to be honest with you. Clearly, the voters here in Pennsylvania didn't share those concerns when they elected Josh Shapiro in a landslide as our governor. Clearly, they don't share those concerns today, and the fact that he has over a 60% approval rating here in Pennsylvania. So I think a lot of that was just petty politics, unfortunately.
And how confident are you? I know you said you're very excited about this pick, and we see that packed arena behind you, but how confident are you that Vice President Harris and Tim Walz can win Pennsylvania in November?
I think as Democrats, we have a job to do to get out all across Pennsylvania to talk about our vision for this country, how we're going to create an economy that works for everyone, how we are going to make our community safer, and how we're going to create ladders of opportunity for everyone. The contrast in this election couldn't be more clear. Kamala Harris has fought at every turn to move America forward. Donald Trump at every turn has fought to take us backwards, to strip us of our fundamental rights and freedoms. And I think at the end of the day, people are going to understand that contrast, and they're going to vote to make Kamala Harris our next president.
You are the first African-American lieutenant governor in the Commonwealth and also the youngest. How do you think Walz specifically can connect with not only black voters but also young voters there in the Keystone State?
Yeah, look, I think Governor Walz just has to talk about the work that he's been doing up until this point. He has been a champion for America's working families, from passing universal breakfast and lunch in Minnesota, helping bring down the cost of insulin, to fighting for manufacturing jobs and working people. I think he just needs to get out, talk about what his record is, and talk about the vision he has for America. And I think that'll resonate with voters across the spectrum here in Pennsylvania. The one thing that voters here in Pennsylvania respect is when you show up, you look them in the eye, you tell them the truth, and you listen. And I think Governor Walz has proven time and time again he's capable of doing that.
And what else do you think he brings to the ticket?
Look, I think he brings the fact that he has served our country in the military, the fact that he is someone who's worked his way through life from a working class family. I'm the proud son of a union bus driver and a hairdresser. I know what it's like to come from a working class family. I think that resonates with folks. And I think more people want elected officials who understand the day-to-day needs of working class Americans. And I think that's a tremendous asset that he brings to this ticket.
And then lastly, what role do you and Governor Shapiro expect to play over the next 3 months until the election?
Well, look, we're going to be out crisscrossing Pennsylvania. I'm proud to co-chair Black Voters for Kamala Harris here in Pennsylvania. I know Governor Shapiro has been on the road. We are going to crisscross this Commonwealth talking about the stakes of this election, talking about how our fundamental rights and freedoms are on the line. And we're going to talk about the contrast between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. So we are going to be active participants in this campaign, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure we ensure a win here in Pennsylvania for the Harris-Walz ticket.
All right, Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis, thank you so much. Former President Trump already has a strong critique for Tim Walz. We'll hear from his campaign about the Democratic pick. You're streaming America Decides.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gailey has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
You get an opportunity in America in not too long to have a binary choice between someone who cares deeply about the American public, who has policies that made a difference, versus someone who made it very clear Trump is for Trump.
Former President Donald Trump is not mincing his words when it comes to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz joining the 2024 Democratic ticket. In a campaign fundraising email circulated today, the former president said Walz would be, quote, the worst VP in history. Danielle Alvarez joins us now. She is a senior advisor for the Trump campaign. Danielle, thanks so much for being with us. And why is the former president characterizing Walz in that way?
Well, Governor Tim Walz is very liberal. We know that he believes in sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. In fact, he signed into law giving free tuition and free health care to illegal immigrants, which is par for the course and the perfect pick for the original border czar, Kamala Harris, who has overseen the worst border crisis in American history since border crossings have been recorded. We know that he has voted to raise taxes, and we are seeing devastation in the economy right now with the stock market crashing yesterday, with inflation up 21%, costing American families thousands every month. We know that they're both soft on crime. We know that they support defunding the police, and he oversaw the worst riots in 2020 in Minneapolis that burned down a police precinct and devastated 1,500 businesses. He is far left, and it is clear that Kamala Harris bent the knee and picked someone who was as far left, weak, failed, and dangerously liberal as she is.
Did this pick catch you off guard?
Our campaign was absolutely prepared as soon as they started floating names, but especially prepared for Walz to be chosen. It was clear that she was not going to pick any sort of common sense choice, maybe putting a Pennsylvania battleground in play, maybe putting an Arizona in play. Instead, it says a lot about their campaign and how they feel about the state of the race that she chose the governor from Minnesota, a state that President Trump has put in play. It says a lot where they're putting their ad dollars. They're putting their ad dollars in New Hampshire. They're putting their ad dollars in Maine. It's clear that they're competing for their base and the most radical parts of their base, the most left-wing parts of their base, instead of really competing for the whole country. That's what President Trump is doing when he goes out and he talks about the issues that matter to voters. He talks about the economy and his record delivering a strong economy, his 4 years in the White House, his record low cost, his record peace through strength at home and abroad. We're at the brink of war. Tensions continue to escalate in the Middle East. And so it is clear that contrast between Kamala Harris and her VP pick, Walz, and between President Trump and J.D. Vance.
And we're seeing Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro enter the stage now at a rally with Vice President Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. But in terms of Governor Shapiro, since the Vice President did not go with him, does the Trump campaign believe that this now puts Pennsylvania back in play?
Pennsylvania has always been in play. I mean, the Democrats were in a honeymoon period because they replaced someone who is comatose and had a coup, and Kamala Harris ascended the throne. But again, it's just a honeymoon phase. And David Axelrod said the same thing. Donald Trump is at the helm. Donald Trump is on offense because this, voters have said, is about record. It's about the economy. It's about the border. It's about what's happening on the global stage. And they know President Trump's record of success. So he's performing well in every battleground state. And he's the first Republican candidate to be ahead in the RCP average. And so we are ready to take on this ticket, and we are ready to deliver victory in November for the campaign and for the American people.
All right, Danielle Alvarez, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And we want to take you now back to Philadelphia, where Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro is now addressing rallygoers. Let's take a listen.
GSD. I focus on getting shit done for all of you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I want you to know I am going to continue to pour my heart and soul into serving you every single day as your governor. And I'm going to be working my tail off to make sure we make Kamala Harris and Tim Walz the next leaders of the United States of America. That's right. Let me tell you about my friend Kamala Harris, someone I've been friends with for 2 decades. She is courtroom tough. She has a big heart. And she is battle tested and ready to go. Whether in a courtroom, whether fighting as Attorney General, whether remembering the people who have oftentimes been left behind when she was sitting in the halls of power in the Senate, Kamala Harris has always understood that you got to be every day for the people, for the people. And she has served with honesty. She has served with dignity. And every step of the way, she's broken barriers to serve all of us. Now, Philly, hear me on this. That's a hell of a stark contrast from the guy running on the other side. Oh, y'all know who I'm talking about, I guess. You see, we remember here in Philly what it was like when Donald Trump was our president. We remember when he was president, it was more chaos, fewer jobs, and less freedom. You see, Philly, I know y'all, we walk around with a little bit of a chip on our shoulder because we remember, right? And we remember that it was Donald Trump that ripped away the freedom of millions of American women to make decisions over their own bodies. We remember that. We remember that. We're not going back. We are not going back. You're right. Not going back. And here's the thing. We don't want to go back, but let's go back for a second. Just remember. Let's just remember, because I think there's some folks out there that still have a little bit of brain fog, having a hard time remembering what it was like. Now listen, he brought all that chaos and limited our freedoms back when he was president, and let's be honest, didn't know what the hell he was doing. He didn't. But this is serious, gang. He knows what he's doing now. He does. And the Supreme Court that he packed, the Supreme Court that he has packed has ruled that he is above the law. He is outside of the law. And now he's got a clear plan. They all wrote it down in that whole Project 2025 thing. And they got a clear plan to take away more of our freedoms. They got a clear plan to use the Justice Department to go against our enemies. They got a clear plan to isolate us in the world. And let me tell you something, I ain't going back. I am not going back. I'm not. And neither do you want to go back. We are not going back. We're not going back. No. We're not. And not only are we not going back, we're not going into the future with Donald Trump, not going in the future with him. A guy who has made clear, he's told us what he wants to do, more chaos, less freedom. And, yo, friends, it was Maya Angelou who said it, when they tell you who they are, yeah, I believe them, and I don't want to see that. And Donald Trump, well, he's now got a partner with him. Y'all see that guy? Yeah. J.D. Vance, he's not exactly off to a good start. I think we can all agree on it. But I think part of the reason why he's not off to a good start is this, and it's serious. He doesn't know who he is. And he's not being honest with himself, so he can't be honest with the American people. He can't. Now, so if I hear you right, and I think I do, you're chanting, he's a weirdo. Which means, man, I love you, Philly. Which means, if you're chanting, he's a weirdo, then you heard of my good friend and our next Vice President, Tim Walz. Because Tim Walz, in his beautiful Midwestern plain-spoken way, he summed up J.D. Vance the best. He's a weirdo. And I want to talk about Tim Walz, because Philly, in a minute, he's going to come out here, and I want you to give him a whole lot of love. Tim Walz is a great man. Tim Walz is an outstanding governor. Tim Walz is a teacher. Tim Walz is a guardsman. Tim Walz is a great patriot. He is. And I'll tell you what else. Tim Walz is a dear friend. And I want you to know, Lori and I feel blessed to have Tim and Gwen in our lives. They are outstanding public servants. And I can't wait for you, Philly, the rest of this Commonwealth, and our entire country to get the chance to know the Walzes, the next Vice President and Second Lady of this nation. Now, I think it is fitting, and it is special, that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have chosen to launch their campaign right here in Philadelphia, in the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. And importantly, they chose to launch their campaign right here in the birthplace of real freedom. You know, the other side, Trump and his sycophants, let me tell you something. They love to talk a good game about freedom, right? They love to cloak themselves in the blanket of freedom all the time. They love to talk a good game. But hear me on this. It's not freedom to tell our children what books they're allowed to read. That's not freedom. It's not. It's not. It's not freedom to say you can go to work, but you can't join a union. That's not freedom. It's not freedom to tell women what they're allowed to do with their bodies. That's not freedom. It's not. It's not. It is not. No, it's not. It is not. And it won't be that way when Kamala Harris is our president. And it sure as hell isn't freedom to say you can go vote, but he's going to pick the winner. That is not freedom. That's not what patriots have fought for over the years. It is not. You know what we are for? You know what Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are for? They are for real freedom. They are. The kind of real freedom that comes when we look that young girl in North Philly in the eye and we invest in her public school because we believe in her. We believe in real freedom, the kind of freedom that comes when we invest in our police and we invest in our communities because we believe that young girl should walk to and from school safely and back to her mama at the end of the night. We believe in real freedom where the young girl can grow up and be whatever she wants. She can be a welder. She can go to college. She can be who she is. That is real freedom, and that is what we are fighting for. We believe in the kind of real freedom where she grows up in a community where she can breathe clean air and drink clean water and know that she will leave an environment to the next generation that is great for her kids and her grandkids. And Kamala Harris and Tim Walz believe in a real freedom where you can marry who you love and be who you are. Now, freedom is on the ballot. And our fundamental freedoms are at risk. And I know when it's at risk, it's easy to feel uneasy. And it's easy to get down. But let me tell you something, Philly. Let me tell you something, Pennsylvania. Let me tell you something, America. I am more optimistic than ever before. And the reason I'm more optimistic than ever before is because of all of you. And because of what a band of patriots started here in our taverns, in our town squares, and at Independence Hall, just a couple miles from here, nearly 2.5 centuries ago. You see, they came together. They came together to declare our independence from a king, and we're not going back to a king. And we're not going back. And when they declared that independence from a king, they came together and they said, we are going to form a union. And over the last 248 years, the reason why I'm optimistic, the reason why I'm hopeful, is because as we've written this American story over the last 2.5 centuries, it's been ordinary Americans taking up the baton from those patriots and saying, we're going to do extraordinary things. Octavius Catto understood that responsibility. Cecil B. Moore understood that responsibility. Gen Z, when they're organized and on TikTok, understand that responsibility. And I'm optimistic today because the task of perfecting our union, the task of defending our fundamental freedoms, it now falls to all of you. To freedom-loving Americans all across this great country. And to the good people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania who will decide this next election and understand our unique responsibility. I love you too, and this is a moment where we all have to understand that while we'll see Kamala Harris and Tim Walz's names on the ballot, that this election isn't just about their names on this ballot. This election is about all of you. And whether or not you're willing to do this hard work to fight for our freedom, whether or not you're willing to do this hard work that started here 248 years ago. I want to just say this. I lean on my family and I lean on my faith, which calls me to serve. And I am proud of my faith. Now hear me. I'm not here to preach at y'all, but I want to tell you what my faith teaches me. My faith teaches me that no one is required to complete the task, but neither are we free to refrain from it. That means that each of us has a responsibility to get off the sidelines, to get in the game, and to do our part. Are you ready to do your part? Are you ready to form a more perfect union? Are you ready to build an America where no matter what you look like, where you come from, who you love or who you pray to, that this will be a place for you? And are you ready to look the next President of the United States in the eye and say, "Hello, Madam President"? I am too, so let's get to work.
Leslie Sanchez and Chuck Rocha. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist. Chuck is a Democratic strategist who was a senior advisor for Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign. And Chuck, I want to start very briefly with you. I mean, what's going through your mind as you just watch that? You know, if that was the warm-up act, what does that mean for the main attraction?
I think it tells you that we have a plethora of great talent in the Democratic Party. If that guy didn't get picked to be the VP, it just shows you how deep our bench really is. And, you know, Governor Shapiro is a great public speaker. He's a great politician. People forget that he served as the Attorney General for years, that him and Vice President Harris have been great friends. I think that he's going to be great out on the stump, and he's going to work very hard to deliver Pennsylvania for the Democratic Party. And I'm excited, and you can see how everybody in Philly is pumped up and ready to go.
And Leslie, to you, I mean, as you watch Governor Shapiro and as you've seen reaction throughout the day to Governor Walz being selected as the pick, I mean, how are Republicans processing this?
I think Republicans are really excited about the contrast. I thought that was a rousing speech. I don't think you can deny that. He started talking about his faith. He talked about, you know, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But what he didn't talk about is really the cost that you pay for these kind of euphoric liberal policies that we're starting to see in what would be a new Harris administration. And I think that's where Republicans are trying to pin down. They point to the fact that on her website, there is no platform, that she still is a projection of what all of these voters, and I would say Republican or Democrat, want them to be. But it's fundamentally when you see those policies in action, that and the practicality of it is where Republicans are focused. Open borders leads to sanctuary cities. Decriminalizing illegal immigrants leads to health care, for example, in Minnesota for undocumented aliens. And all the cost of social services and the pressure it places on these communities. Those are the types of stories Republicans are ready to tell.
And Chuck, very briefly, as we wait our first images of the vice president and her new running mate, Governor Walz, what do you think he brings to the ticket?
He brings a guy that served in our National Guard since he was 17 years old. He's a high school football coach. He was a high school teacher. He is mid-American, Midwestern, white dad. And that's exactly what you want as a vice president pick for this election. You have to win Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan before we can win Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. And that's why this was a very, very intentional move to make sure that there was somebody on the ticket that could go into union halls with auto workers in Detroit, with steel workers in Pennsylvania, and pick up a fishing rod in Wisconsin and have a campaign trail that goes through fishing lodges and the outdoors as well. So you get the total package there. And I think that's why you're going to see every part of America covered on this ticket.
And Leslie, to Chuck's point there, you know, when we're just getting some excerpts of the vice president's speech where she's expected to talk about her Oakland roots, but also talk about Governor Walz's roots as the son of the Nebraska Plains who grew up working on a farm. I mean, in terms of the diversity of this ticket, I know Republicans have tried to paint the vice president as this San Francisco liberal, a California socialist. Are those arguments going to continue to work?
I think so. I think so, especially when you're talking about independent voters. You've already seen that Trump, in some cases, is about 9 percentage points above, in support with independent voters, because I like the Maya Angelou line. The first time someone shows you who they are, believe them. I don't think you can have a career, a 2-decade career as Kamala Harris, and then all of a sudden overnight have a completely different identity. And this type of recasting of the Democratic Party, that it is not middle America, but an extreme California and Minnesota, the two bluest areas of the country that don't reflect the center-right nation. I think that's where the policies are really going to divide the two parties and the two kind of directions of the future. And Harris is going to have a really difficult time defining not only her past statements and how that aligns, but I was talking about, you talk about open borders, and I know Chuck knows so much about this, what that means in some of those battleground states and the pressures that it's placed on those states. There's a real politique example in Minnesota. You have a governor who implemented some of the most aggressive liberal policies in the nation, and you can see the impact it had. So that contrast and comparison is really where Republicans, I think, are going to have spend a tremendous amount of time.
And Chuck, to you, in terms of selecting Governor Walz, I mean, yes, he's from a Midwestern state and he has these Midwestern roots. You know, obviously, in terms of the Harris campaign and even prior to that with the Biden campaign, you know, it was all about holding this blue wall, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. So in terms of Governor Walz, I mean, does that translate to those 3 states specifically?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And you'll have to realize that presidential campaigns are different than your local congressional race or your local Senate race. If you care about a particular issue in the presidential race, 95% of all of those people have already made up their mind. They know who they're going to vote for. They're going to vote for Harris or they're going to vote for Trump. What you've seen is this is an injection of energy into a campaign where the folks in the middle, if they really care about a particular issue, have already made up their mind. This comes down to trust and popularity. Folks like to push back all the time and like, Chuck, let me see your policy book on this, or let me tell you about this. Donald Trump got elected because he had a red hat that said, I'm going to make America great again. He didn't have any nuanced great policies, just like lots of folks who didn't have great policies got elected. Because at the end of the day, voters in America want to know, are you going to make my life better? And do I trust you to do that? And have you built up the trust to actually get my vote? It's not like the local congressional election. And to your point about these Midwestern states, Walz brings that. He served in the Congress. He served in the National Guard. He's been the governor of a state. He's got a long track record that he can back up. But he was also a father of a 15-year-old little girl and was a high school football coach. He's about as relatable as you're going to get in those Midwestern cities.
Leslie, how do you respond to that?
I think that when he was in Congress, he was a lot more moderate. But when he moved to be governor and the executive of the state, he moved the most progressive leftist policies that we have in the country. 40% increase in state budget, taxpayer health insurance for undocumented immigrants, you know, having taxpayers support gender-affirming surgeries for minors. And parents have been fighting that in the state even to this day. So there's a lot of discrepancy in some of those policies. And I think when it comes down to
saying like that may not play as well in a state like Pennsylvania and a state like Michigan.
What's fascinating, before this, when Biden was at the top of the ticket, the big kind of alarm bells that were going off is Trump was doing really well in Minnesota. He was looking at expanding the map from Minnesota, Virginia, New Hampshire. That all changed and shifted, but you still have him incredibly competitive. He's got 8 offices there. Is it enough to move those margins? It's really too soon to tell. But the thing that voters will tell you is when it was a Trump administration, I know what he stands for. I may not like his style and his personality, but I had money and I don't have money now. I mean, it's pretty basic in terms of how people talk about it. They talk about freedoms in that speech, and we all want our freedoms, but they had freedom to have financial security, freedom to be able to take care of their parents, freedom to be able to be empowered in the schools, and now parents feel like they're fighting back. And a lot of those COVID restrictions that you saw in Minnesota, that's going to be coming back in ads as well. He had some of the most draconian measures to stop business and really put a hindrance in closing schools. Parents are not going to forget that. So it does come down to table issues. And I think Chuck and I are speaking the same language. It isn't these big like policy lineups, but it's how they trust the candidate. I will agree with Chuck. And there's going to be such a delta between these two campaigns. The question for Republicans is, can they really make that case in this short a time? And the longer that Harris goes without doing interviews, without going on a national debate stage, I think it's a very big challenge for the GOP.
And Chuck, we know that progressives really pushed for Governor Walz, as did, many union leaders. So how do you see this playing with those key components of the base? I mean, at the end of the day, we know that every election, we're told, is a turnout election, but does this help kind of drive the base and drive that turnout that Democrats have been seeking?
It's talking about the unions, talking about quote unquote progressive liberals. Everybody puts some kind of label on somebody. I talk like this. I grew up in rural East Texas in a trailer house to a single mother. And yes, I'm a progressive and a liberal, so you can't put all of us in the same place. But I think it's going to have a big impact in places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, where what you just talked about, that union vote may not matter in South Carolina. The union vote may not matter in Mississippi or Louisiana. But I'm going to tell you something as somebody who lived in Pennsylvania and worked for the steelworkers for 15 years, who has a little boy who's now a 30-year-old man who's a steam fitter in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that the unions are still very strong and very connected in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which used to be the backbone of our paper industry. It's not just the active members, but the decades of retirees that really can deliver those states when you start talking about the unions and the union membership. And putting somebody like Tim Walz on the ticket with VP Harris is a very big deal in those three states. Will it matter as much in other states? Maybe not. But in the states that you want the most, you're just describing now why she went with this pick over other picks. Josh Shapiro had some issues with the unions. Kelly had some other issues with unions. And at the end of the day, she went with somebody who had a lot of union bona fides to deliver these three states. Again, if she can win these three states, they don't need any others.
And I know Republicans, Leslie, have kind of been watching this all play from the sidelines. But, now that this ticket is officially set, we've got some 90 days to go. At what point do you think we will see a debate not only between the former president and Vice President Harris, because that now seems a bit in doubt, but also between J.D. Vance and Governor Walz?
I think there's going to be a lot in the air about they both want to come to the table, but actually meeting those guidelines. And since we took out the nonpartisan, debate commission, this is exactly why the commission was there before, because now they're looking at, the past statements of particular journalists. They don't rely on the independence of the news organization, and each is kind of pitching on each side. It's going to be incredibly difficult, but they have to. It behooves the former president to get to that debate stage more than once, actually, at least a couple of times with Kamala Harris.
And on that note, with the few minutes we have left, let's turn back to Philadelphia to get our very first glimpse of this new ticket, Vice President Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Oh, it is good to be back in Pennsylvania. So let me say, on behalf of myself and the first, second gentleman of the United States, my husband, Doug Emhoff, thank you for the warm welcome. And let me just say, it's good to be here with all of the friends, all of the leaders who are here. I want to thank former Governor Ed Rendell, Senator Bob Casey, who we will re-elect this November, Senator John Fetterman, Mayor Sherelle Parker, and Chairman Jamie Harrison. And it is so good to be here with your incredible Governor, Josh Shapiro. And I will say, Josh is a dear, dear friend and an extraordinary leader. He and I have been spending a lot of time together over the years. And I told Josh, look, I am so invested in our friendship in doing this together, because together with Josh Shapiro, we will win Pennsylvania. We will win Pennsylvania. And I thank you, Josh. I thank you. So Philadelphia, I launched my campaign for the President of the United States a mere 2 weeks ago. And it's been a bit of a whirlwind. And just last night, the delegates to the Democratic National Convention finished voting. And so I stand before you today to proudly announce I am now officially the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. And so now we got some work to do. We need to move to the general election and win that. And to all the friends, listen, we also need to level set. We are the underdogs in this race. But we have the momentum, and I know exactly what we are up against. Now, many of you know, before I was elected Vice President or elected a United States Senator, I was an elected Attorney General, and before that, elected District Attorney. And before that, I was a courtroom prosecutor. So in those roles, I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women. Fraudsters who scammed consumers. Cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, Donald Trump's type. our campaign, is not just a fight against Donald Trump. Our campaign, this campaign, is a fight for the future. It's a fight for the future. In Pennsylvania, we fight for a future with affordable housing, affordable health care, affordable child care, paid leave. We fight for a future where we build a broad-based economy, where every American has the opportunity to own a home, to start a business, and to build wealth. We fight for a future where we bring down prices that are still too high and lower the cost of living for America's families. So that they have a chance not just to get by, but to get ahead. We fight for a future where we defend our most fundamental freedoms. The freedom to vote. The freedom to be safe from gun violence. The freedom to love who you love openly and with pride. And the freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body, not having her government tell her what to do. So here's the thing. Since the day that I announced my candidacy, I set out to find a partner who can help build this brighter future. A leader who will help unite our nation and move us forward. A fighter for the middle class. A patriot who believes, as I do, in the extraordinary promise of America. A promise of freedom, opportunity, and justice, not just for some, but for all. So, Pennsylvania, I'm here today because I found such a leader. Governor Tim Walz of the great state of Minnesota. To those who know him best, Tim is more than a governor. To his wife, Gwen, he is a husband. To his kids, Hope and Gus, he is a dad. To his fellow veterans, he is Sergeant Major Walz. To the people of southern Minnesota, for 12 years, he was congressman. To his former high school students, he was Mr. Walz. And to his former high school football players, he was Coach. And in 91 days, nation will know Coach Walz by another name, Vice President of the United States. So America, for some folks, they're just getting to know Coach Walz's story. And I'll tell you, he is the proud product of a middle-class family in rural Nebraska. He is a veteran who served our nation in uniform for more than 2 decades as a member of the Army National Guard, and he went to college on the GI Bill. He is someone who, long before he entered politics, worked as a teacher. When Coach Walz and his wife Gwen moved from his native Nebraska to Minnesota nearly 30 years ago, they both took jobs at the local high school. Coach Walz taught social studies, Gwen taught English. After school, Tim was the linebackers coach for the football team. Where I've heard the stories about he had a knack for using the game of football to teach life lessons. He saw the potential in kids who sometimes didn't even see it in themselves. Under those Friday night lights, Coach Walz motivated his players to believe they could achieve anything. And together, they defied the odds, hear this out, going from a winless record to the school's first ever state championship. And I'll say and I'll add, Tim wasn't only a role model on the football field. Around that same time, Coach Walz was approached by a student in his social studies class. The young man was one of the first openly gay students at the school and was hoping to start a gay-straight alliance. At a time when acceptance was difficult to find for LGBTQ students, Tim knew the signal that it would send to have a football coach get involved. So he signed up to be the group's faculty advisor. And as students have said, he made this school a safe place for everybody. In the high school yearbook, the students voted Coach Walz the, quote, most inspiring faculty member. And as I think everyone here can see, Tim Walz was the kind of teacher and mentor that every child in America dreams of having, and that every kid deserves. The kind of coach, because he's the kind of person who makes people feel like they belong and then inspires them to dream big. And that's the kind of vice president he will be. And that's the kind of vice president America deserves. So it was Coach Walz's students who actually helped him decide to run for office. And he served 12 years in Congress, representing a purple district as he reached across the aisle to get things done. He was the highest ranking enlisted man to ever serve in the United States Congress. And the top Democrat on the Veterans Committee. And he was known as one of Capitol Hill's best marksmen, winning a bipartisan sharpshooting contest year after year. In Washington, Tim worked to raise the minimum wage, to protect the freedom of workers to join a union, and he cast one of the critical votes to pass the Affordable Care Act. Which, of course, gave health insurance to tens of millions of Americans. I'm going to tell you, when we win, Tim and I will continue to make the Affordable Care Act even stronger. We will win. We're dealing with on the other side. So on that last topic, if Donald Trump gets the chance, he will end the Affordable Care Act and take us back to a time when insurance companies had the power to deny people with pre-existing conditions. You remember what that was like? Children with asthma, breast cancer survivors, grandparents with diabetes. Well, Governor Walz and I will not let that happen. Because we believe health care should be a right and not just a privilege for those who can afford it. As governor, Tim has continued to fight for working families. He secured paid leave for workers in Minnesota. And he refused, as governor, to allow any student in their public schools to go hungry. Breakfast and lunch free for every child. And Tim Walz and I, we agree about many things, including when our middle class is strong, America is strong. And strengthening the middle class will be my defining goal as I am President of the United States. So Pennsylvania, ours is a fight for the future of the middle class, and it is a fight for freedom. In this moment, we are witnessing a full-on attack against hard-fought, hard-won freedoms and rights. Take reproductive freedom. Now think about this. Donald Trump said he wants to punish women. And as a result of his actions, today in America, 1 out of 3 women live in a state with a Trump abortion ban. 1 out of 3. Some of these bans go back to the 1800s, even before women had a right to vote. Think about that. Well, Tim and I have a message for Trump and others who want to turn back the clock on our fundamental freedoms. We're not going back. And so let me say about Tim Walz, he has shown up to stand against these attacks long before he stood on the stage with me. After Roe was overturned, he was the first governor in the country to sign a new law that enshrined reproductive freedom as a fundamental right. And with Tim Walz by my side when I am President of the United States and we win majorities in the United States Congress, we will pass a bill to restore reproductive freedom, and I will proudly sign it into law. Tim Walz has also defended the sacred freedom to vote. As governor, he signed the most significant expansion of voting rights in Minnesota in over 50 years. And with Governor Walz's help, when I am president, we are going to finally pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. We're going to get it done. So Tim is a hunter and a gun owner who believes, as the majority of gun owners do, that we need reasonable gun safety laws in America. So as governor, he expanded background checks and increased penalties for illegal firearm sales. And together, when we win in November, we are finally going to pass universal background checks, red flag laws, and an assault weapons ban. Through his work, Tim, the way I think about it, he really does shine a light on a brighter future that we can build together. In his state, he has been a model chief executive, and with his experience, I'm telling you, Tim Walz will be ready on day one. In fact, when you compare his resume shall we, to Trump's running mate, well, some might say it's like a matchup between the varsity team and the JV squad. So, Pennsylvania, ultimately in this election, we each face a question. What kind of country do we want to live in? A country of freedom, compassion, and rule of law, or a country of chaos, fear, and hate? And here's the beauty of our democracy. We each have the power to answer that question. We each have the power to answer that question. The power is with the people. We love our country, and I believe it is the highest form of patriotism to fight for the ideals of our country. That is how we preserve the promise of America. And after all, you know, the promise of America is what makes it possible for two middle-class kids, one a daughter of Oakland, California, who was raised by a working mother, the other a son of the Nebraska plains who grew up working on a farm, it's the promise of America, because only in America is it possible for them together to make it all the way to the White House. And so Coach Walz and I may hail from different corners of our great country, but our values are the same. And we both believe in lifting people up, not knocking them down. He and I, we both know the vast majority of people in our country have so much more in common than what separates them. When we look at folks, we see in our fellow Americans neighbors, not enemies. Not enemies. And so my promise to you is this. Our campaign will reach out to everyone, from red states to blue states, from the heartland to the coast, in rural, urban, suburban, and tribal communities. We are running a campaign on behalf of all Americans. And when elected, we will govern on behalf of all Americans. And so, with Tim Walz by my side, and with all of you at our side, let us fight for the promise of our future. And with that, I ask Pennsylvania, are you ready to make your voices heard? Do we believe in freedom? Do we believe in opportunity? Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we ready to fight for it? And when we fight, we win. And now, United States, Tim Walz.
Wow. Thank you, Philadelphia. Thank you, Madam Vice President, for the trust you put in me, but maybe more so, thank you for bringing back the joy. I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you and Doug, this incredible journey. And Pennsylvania, I know you know this, but my God, what a treasure you have in Josh Shapiro. Holy hell, can this guy bring the fire? He can bring the fire. This is a visionary leader. Also, I have to tell you, everybody in America knows when you need a bridge fixed, call that guy. And I think sometimes we forget, and you see people a little one-dimensional, but seeing a guy who cares so deeply about his family, a man with compassion, vision, and I'll have to tell you this, I know this from experience, there is no one you would rather go to a Springsteen concert in Jersey with than him, than that guy. Brooks. And I can't wait for all of you and America to get to know my incredible wife, Gwen, a 29-year public school educator. Don't ever underestimate teachers. And our two beautiful kids, Hope and Gus. I couldn't be prouder to be on this ticket and to help Vice President Harris become what we all know is very, very good for us to think about, next President of the United States of America. From her first day as a prosecutor, as a district attorney, Attorney General of the great state of California, a United States Senator, and Vice President of the United States. Vice President Harris has fought on the side of the American people. She took on the predators, she took on the fraudsters, she took down the transnational gangs, she stood up against powerful corporate interests, and she never hesitated to reach across the aisle if it meant improving people's lives. And I want all of you to hold this and don't ever underestimate the power of this. She does it all with a sense of joy. I know a little something about that commitment to people. I was born in West Point, Nebraska. I lived in Butte, a small town of 400, where community was a way of life. Growing up, I spent the summers working on the family farm. My mom and dad taught us, show generosity towards your neighbors and work for a common good. My dad served in the Army during the Korean War, and with his encouragement, at 17, I joined the Army National Guard. For 24 years, I proudly wore the uniform of this nation. The National Guard gave me purpose. It gave me the strength of a shared commitment to something greater than ourselves. And just as it did for my dad and millions of others, the GI Bill gave me a shot at a college education. My dad was a teacher. My brothers and sisters and I followed in their footsteps. 3 out of 4 of us married teachers. What we do. For nearly 20 years, I had the privilege of teaching high school social studies and coaching football. Including winning that state championship. Thank you. Don't ever close the yearbook. Don't ever. But it was my students. They encouraged me to run for office. They saw in me what I was hoping to instill in them, a commitment of common good, a belief that one person can make a difference. So in 2006, I took a leap and I ran for Congress. And because high school teachers are super optimistic, I was running in a district that had 1 Democrat since 1892. Well, my neighbors graced me with an opportunity to represent them in the United States House of Representatives. I'm proud of the work we did there together. I worked across the aisle on veterans issues, on agriculture, and on ways to grow rural economies. I learned the art of compromise without compromising my values. And now, as governor of the great state of Minnesota, I bring those experiences to bear in tackling the challenges that are facing our great state. Minnesota's strength comes from our values, our commitment to working together, to seeing past our differences, to always being willing to lend a helping hand. Those are the same values I learned on the family farm and tried to instill in my students. I took it to Congress and to the state capitol, and now Vice President Harris and I are running to take those very values to the White House. Now, Donald Trump sees the world a little differently than us. First of all, he doesn't know the first thing about service. He doesn't have time for it because he's too busy serving himself. Again and again and again, Trump weakens our economy to strengthen his own hand. He mocks our laws. He sows chaos and division. And that's to say nothing of his record as president. He froze in the face of the COVID crisis. He drove our economy into the ground. And make no mistake, violent crime was up under Donald Trump. That's not even counting the crimes he committed. You know, some of us are, some of us in here are old enough to remember. I see you down there. I see those old white guys. Some of us are old enough to remember when it was Republicans who were talking about freedom. It turns out now what they meant was the government should be free to invade your doctor's office. In Minnesota, we respect our neighbors and their personal choices that they make. Even if we wouldn't make the same choice for ourselves, there's a golden rule. Mind your own damn business. These guys are after my heart chanting, mind your own damn business. That feels good, so thank you. Look, that includes IVF, and this gets personal for me and my family. When my wife and I decided to have children, we spent years going through infertility treatments. And I remember praying every night for a call for good news. The pit in my stomach when the phone rang, and the agony when we heard that the treatments hadn't worked. So it wasn't by chance that when we welcomed our daughter into the world, we named her Hope. When Vice President and I talk about freedom, we mean the freedom to make your own health care decisions. And for our children to be free to go to school without worrying they'll be shot dead in their classrooms. By the way, as you heard, I was one of the best shots in Congress, but in Minnesota, we believe in the Second Amendment, but we also believe in common sense gun violence laws. Vice President Harris' idea of freedom is a ticket for education to be that ticket to the middle class, not crippling debt. Air that's clean, water that's pure, communities that are safe. A place where we settle our political differences not through violence, but with our votes. And that's what this election's about. What direction will this country go in? He's not going back. Well, Donald Trump would damn sure take us backwards. Let's be clear about that. And don't believe him when he plays dumb. He knows exactly what Project 2025 will do to restrict our freedoms. To rig the economy to help the super rich. If Trump gets a chance to return, he's going to pick up exactly where he left off 4 years ago. Only this time, it will be much, much worse. Raising costs on middle-class family. He will repeal the Affordable Care Act, no doubt about it. He'll gut Social Security and Medicare. And when somebody tells you they believe him. He said he'd ban abortion across this country, and he'll do it, whether or not Congress is there or not. Donald Trump's not fighting for you or your family. He never sat at that kitchen table like the one I grew up at, wondering how we were going to pay the bills. He sat at his country club up in Mar-a-Lago, wondering how he can cut taxes for his rich friends. And I got to tell you, his running mate shares his dangerous and backward agenda for this country. J.D. Vance literally wrote the foreword for the architect of the Project 2025 agenda. Like all regular people I grew up with in the heartland, J.D. studied at Yale, had his career funded by Silicon Valley billionaires, and then wrote a bestseller trashing that community. Come on! That's not what middle America is. And I got to tell you, I can't wait to debate the guy. That is if he's willing to get off the couch and show up. So, you see what I did there? Look. I got to tell you, pointing out just an observation of mine that I made. I just have to say it. You know it, you feel it. These guys are creepy, and yes, just weird as hell. That's what you see. That's what you see. So you know what's out there, so say it with me. We aren't going back. We aren't going back. We are not going back. So we got 91 days. My God, that's easy. We'll sleep when we're dead. Over those next 91 days and every day in the White House, I'll have Vice President Harris's back. Every single day. And we'll have yours. You know how this works. We can't do it alone. We need you, each and every one of you. Go over to KamalaHarris.com, get on board, because we need you. Freedom to make our own choices. This leader, this compassionate, careful, joyous leader believes in each and every one of you. My God, you came here tonight to sit at the very top because you love this country and you're not going back. She believes in the opportunity for every single person to join the middle class. She believes in the promise of America. We just got to fight. We just got to fight. Because as soon-to-be President Harris says, when we fight, we win. Thank you, Philadelphia. Thank you, Vice President. God bless America.
Okay, there you have it, the debut of Tim Walz as the vice presidential pick. I'm Jeff Glorin for John Dickerson tonight, and you've been listening to the debut of Tim Walz as Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate. Harris echoed a popular message of her campaign off the top there, attacking Donald Trump's criminal cases compared to hers as a prosecutor. When Tim Walz got up there, he said some of the same things. Kamala Harris referred to Walz as a dad, husband, teacher, a sergeant commander, but the expression she used most often was as Coach Walz. She kept going back to that, talking about his time as a high school football coach. You heard "we're not going back" a lot, a familiar refrain of the Harris campaign. Walz said there toward the end, talking about Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, he says, quote, "These guys are creepy. They are weird as hell." So as we see them get applause from the audience, we're going to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns from our D.C. Bureau to talk more about all of this. First time we're seeing Walz and Harris together. Caitlin, how is the political world reacting?
Hey, Jeff, good to see you. Well, a lot of people around the country are learning who Walz is. Even people who have covered politics for a long time. He hasn't really been kind of at the forefront here, and he has now been thrust into the spotlight. And Kamala Harris identified the reasons why she picked him, talking about his biography, which you mentioned. That includes not only serving in Congress, not only serving as a governor, but also serving as a football coach. She called him coach repeatedly, and that'll be interesting to see if kind of that continues on the campaign trail. well. And when you look at kind of the candidates that she was considering, all of them were white men. Most of them were governors. And that's telling because Kamala Harris has said that she wants a partner in governing. So she alluded to that as well here. But this is a pick who has also gotten praise from people like Bernie Sanders and Joe Manchin, which shows kind of the broader appeal that this campaign hopes he can have, not only appealing to progressives on policy and items that he's implemented in Minnesota, but also kind of that at least appearance of a folksy appeal in places like the Midwest. You also heard him contrast himself with J.D. Vance, and that is going to be, a debate to watch if it happens. This contrast between two political figures from the Midwest, and this is a campaign that will run through those Midwestern states.
Caitlin, how did Tim Walz leapfrog a couple other vice presidential candidates in Josh Shapiro and Kelly from Arizona, who arguably are bigger stars in the Democratic Party, bigger names, maybe better public speakers? How did it came together pretty quickly for Tim Walz?
Yeah, this has been an extremely tight timeline because of all the reasons that we know. And you mentioned Kelly and Shapiro. They both also come from key battleground states. I mean, Pennsylvania is a state that this campaign absolutely needs to win in order to win the White House. But what was appealing about Walz to Kamala Harris is something that you saw on stage there. They have a chemistry. They get along. They seem to like each other. They're actually the same age, just a few months apart. And she has said that she wants someone who can kind of be in the trenches with her governing. He has experience in Congress, can go to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue when needed, if needed. But you also heard her describe there how she views this campaign, and she described this ticket as the underdog ticket. And that's significant, Jeff, because no matter all of this energy that we've been seeing around Democrats that has been lacking during this campaign, there's a lot of momentum here. The polls have tightened, but this campaign also knows this is going to be a very, very close race. So if you can deploy Tim Walz to the Midwest, have him talk to voters who may have otherwise not been inclined to show up, that could be something that makes the difference here.
Yeah, she said they're the underdogs, but she also says she believes they have the momentum. We're going to bring in CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes now. She's in Philadelphia. Nancy, also interesting to think about Walz's record, which is different it's been different in Minnesota than it was when he was on Capitol Hill. When he served in Congress, he was considered pretty bipartisan. He's been considered pretty liberal and pretty progressive as governor of Minnesota.
Right, and I think that that's a reflection of the political reality, first in his home district, which, as he pointed out in this speech, had generally gone for Republicans before he was elected. So he needed to hew to the political realities in that district, which was pretty moderate. And that's what you saw from Walz on Capitol Hill. And then once he became governor and he had a Democratic state legislature, he really had a very different opportunity and a different mandate. And that's when you saw him sign into law legislation that expanded paid leave in the state, that codified Roe v. Wade, that expanded free school breakfast and lunch to nearly all children in the state. What you saw here tonight was Walz really marrying his political views to those of Vice President Harris, because just as she sort of took a back seat or made a nod to President Biden's views over the past 4 years, as one must when one is the vice president, there was no daylight here on this stage, at least, between where Governor Walz stands and where Vice President Harris stands.
Okay, Nancy Cordes and Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you very much. We're going to have a lot more on the state of this race and the Harris-Walz strategy for the White House following this speech, this dual speech tonight. We're going to be right back. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.